The morning sun cast long shadows across the steps of the county courthouse. It was an ordinary day to most passing by, but for those inside courtroom 3B, it was anything but. Inside, tension coiled tightly in the air. A courtroom packed not for celebrity or spectacle, but for a custody case that had quietly rattled the entire community. Child Protective Services had filed charges against a man named Thomas Keene, a seemingly respected individual in town, for alleged abuse of his ex-girlfriend's 3-year-old daughter, Lily. No one had seen it coming. There had been no witnesses, no video, no screaming headlines. Just a soft-spoken mother. A few bruises the doctor said weren't natural, and a child who had fallen completely silent since that awful night. The case lacked strong evidence. Prosecutors were under pressure. The defense was confident. Everyone thought they knew how this day would end. Among the attendees, seated nervously on the right side of the gallery, was Lily's mother, Rachel. She looked exhausted, more like a shadow of herself than the bright-eyed woman who had once loved a man she now feared. Lily sat on her lap, clinging to a worn bunny toy, her big brown eyes wide with confusion and fatigue. The child hadn't spoken about that night. Not to her mother. Not to the therapists. Not to the investigators. She hadn't even said a word about Thomas since. Her voice, once bubbly and constant, had retreated behind an invisible wall. This silence made the case fragile. But one decision changed everything. The judge, known for his sensitivity in cases involving children, had approved a special support presence in the courtroom. The local police department's K-9 unit, Max, a C.A. large, calm German shepherd with intelligent eyes and a soft demeanor, was placed at the front near the witness stand. His job wasn't to sniff or bark or intimidate. His job was to be there, to calm, to comfort, to let the small feel safe in a room designed for the powerful. Max sat beside his handler, Officer Green, completely still except for the occasional flick of his tail. The courtroom murmured lightly as people took their seats. The bailiff called for order, and the judge entered. The defense team straightened their suits. Prosecutors gathered their scattered notes. Witnesses were on standby. But all eyes couldn't help but drift to the child on her mother's lap. Lily hadn't moved much since they arrived. She hadn't said a word, but she had done one peculiar thing. She kept staring at Max. It wasn't just a curious glance, like a child fascinated by a dog. It was something more focused, intentional, as though she recognized him, or more hauntingly, needed him. Rachel noticed it too. Her daughter, who had become unreachable for weeks, was watching Max with cautious hope. She whispered to her, "It's okay, baby. That's Max. He's here to help." But Lily said nothing, just kept her eyes on the dog. As the court came to order and the attorneys began their opening statements, Rachel clutched Lily a little tighter. The defense painted a picture of misunderstanding, bruises from falling down, a mother twisting facts out of bitterness. They were confident, methodical, clean. The prosecution, however, looked worn. They had no silver bullet, no confession, no direct statement from the child. Their voice trembled slightly as they recited a medical report and referred vaguely to trauma symptoms. And then it happened. As the defense attorney rose again to speak, shifting to suggest the mother may be mentally unstable, Lily moved. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She gently slid down from her mother's lap, her small feet touching the cold courtroom floor. Rachel tried to stop her, whispering, "Lily, no, stay here." But the girl didn't respond. With quiet determination, Lily walked toward the front of the courtroom, not toward the judge, nor the attorneys, but toward Max. Officer Green shifted in his seat, unsure if he should intervene. But Max stayed still, ears perked. The judge noticed the movement and held up a hand before the bailiff could interfere. Everyone turned to look. What was she doing? Why was she walking forward? And why, out of everyone in that room, was she staring only at the dog? What came next would leave the entire courtroom breathless. As Lily's tiny feet padded across the courtroom floor, the hush that had settled over the room deepened. Even the judge, usually stern and composed, leaned forward slightly in his seat, sensing that something significant was unfolding. The defense attorney stood frozen, mid-sentence, unsure whether to continue or step back. No one knew what to expect, not from the 3-year-old, who hadn't said a word since the night everything changed. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest. Her instinct screamed to rush forward and scoop her daughter back into her arms, but something stopped her. It wasn't just fear. It was awe. There was a quiet certainty in Lily's steps, a purposeful calmness in her face that Rachel hadn't seen since before the nightmare began. Lily stopped in front of Max. The large German shepherd didn't move. He simply looked at her with his gentle, intelligent eyes. Slowly, Lily extended a small hand and placed it on his head. Max responded by lowering his ears and wagging his tail softly, acknowledging her with silent acceptance. It was as if he knew she needed this, that this moment belonged to her. For several long seconds, nothing else happened. Then Lily turned around, her hand still resting on Max. Her eyes locked onto Thomas Keene. The man sat across the room, arms folded confidently just moments earlier. But now, his posture was different. He shifted in his seat, his mouth slightly open, watching the girl he had once dismissed as incapable of remembering anything. His lawyer reached out to whisper something, but Thomas ignored him. Lily lifted her arm and pointed, her finger unwavering. Then came 2 words that shattered the courtroom's breathless silence. Bad man. The effect was instant. Gasps rose from the gallery. A juror's pen slipped and clattered onto the wooden floor. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth, tears welling up faster than she could hold them back. The judge didn't speak, but his brows lifted slightly, a rare sign of stunned emotion on the bench. The prosecutor turned sharply, unsure if he'd heard what he thought he did. But Lily wasn't done. Still pointing, she said more clearly this time, "Bad man." Hurt. Her voice was small, but in that moment, it carried more weight than all the legal arguments presented that day. It didn't come from coached testimony. It didn't come from an attorney's mouth or a therapist's notes. It came from the only person who truly knew what happened, and who had finally found the strength to speak. Max remained beside her, unmoving except for the slow, steady wag of his tail, as if acknowledging her courage. He was her anchor in the storm, her shield in a room full of adults and unfamiliar faces. He didn't need to bark. He didn't need to chase. His mere presence gave a voice back to a child who had lost it. The judge cleared his throat and finally spoke. "Let the record reflect the child has made a voluntary statement." His voice, though controlled, betrayed a trace of emotion. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. The defense attorney looked visibly shaken. He turned to Thomas, whispering urgently. Thomas didn't respond. His confident facade had cracked. The truth had come from a source he never expected, and he had no plan for this. The prosecutor rose slowly and addressed the court, requesting a recess to consult with the child's guardian and court-appointed psychologist. The judge granted it without hesitation. As the courtroom began to empty, Rachel ran to her daughter and scooped her up into her arms. Lily didn't cry. She simply hugged her mother tightly, then reached down to stroke Max's head again. It was as though a great weight had finally been lifted, one no child should have ever carried. Outside the courtroom, whispers erupted among the press, attorneys, and spectators. No one was sure what would happen next. But one thing was now certain. The case was no longer the same. The girl who never spoke had finally told the truth. and it started with 2 small words and 1 loyal dog. The recess felt like an eternity. The courtroom had emptied, but the weight of Lily's words still lingered in the air like a suspended breath. Outside in the hallway, attorneys murmured anxiously, while reporters scrambled for statements no one was ready to give. Inside a private chamber next to the courtroom, Lily sat cross-legged on the carpet, gently petting Max. Her mother watched in astonishment, still trying to process what had just occurred. That had been weeks since Lily had spoken about anything beyond the simplest needs. Therapists had tried with toys, drawings, even puppets, all with no success. And yet here she was, calm, alert, and suddenly verbal, as though something inside her had clicked back into place. Something that had been locked away by fear was now being unlocked. By a dog. The court-appointed psychologist, Dr. Melina Rhodes, sat nearby observing. She'd been present at multiple interviews with Lily over the past month and had labeled her trauma silenced, a condition where young children shut down emotionally due to severe stress. But now, she was seeing something she couldn't explain. "I don't want him to be near," Lily said softly, still petting Max. "Near who, sweetheart?" Dr. Rhodes asked gently. Lily hesitated for a moment. "Bad man." The psychologist nodded slowly, then looked at the prosecutor, who stood watching nearby. He was holding a notepad, but his hands weren't moving. He didn't need notes right now. What he needed was confirmation, and it was coming straight from the child, who, just this morning, everyone had expected to remain silent. "Can you tell me what happened?" Dr. Rhodes asked, trying not to push too hard. Lily's hand stopped, moving over Max's fur. She looked down at the floor. He yelled. He made Mommy cry. Then the door slammed. Then it was dark. He pulled my arm. I screamed, but Mommy didn't come. She was on the floor. Rachel's face went pale. Her hands gripped the edge of her chair as tears threatened to escape again. "Did anyone help you?" The psychologist asked gently. Lily nodded. "A big dog. Not real. I dreamed him. He scared the bad man away." Dr. Rhodes glanced down at Max, and then back at Lily. "Was it Max?" Lily nodded once, then looked up with wide, innocent eyes. "He came today. But this time he's real." The room went silent again. The prosecutor turned to Rachel. "Would you allow us to record this interaction for evidentiary purposes? She isn't under pressure. This could qualify as admissible under spontaneous utterance if challenged." Rachel nodded, her voice catching. Yes, of course." "With?" The recording approved, the psychologist continued speaking softly with Lily. Each word from the child helped build a timeline of that horrible night, of Thomas's temper, of the yelling, the slamming, the crying. It wasn't a full transcript of the event, but it was raw, real, and from the source. Most importantly, it aligned closely with forensic elements the prosecution had struggled to connect. Back in the main courtroom, the defense team was visibly rattled. Word of Lily's new statement had reached them, and Thomas, who once sat arrogantly in his tailored suit, now looked like a man unraveling. His lawyer was arguing behind closed doors to try to suppress anything further from being admitted, but it was too late. The judge was briefed. A motion was filed to reopen the courtroom with the new information. He approved it immediately, calling all parties back in after the extended recess. As the room refilled, everyone noticed a shift in energy. The case was no longer a technical battle of evidence. It had become something more human. A little girl had walked across a courtroom with purpose and placed her hand on truth. When Lily entered again with her mother, she didn't need to say a word this time. She simply looked at Max, smiled, and took her seat beside him. And just like that, tide of justice had turned. The courtroom reassembled with a sense of restraint and disbelief. What had started as a near-hopeless custody and abuse case had suddenly turned into the most compelling moment the court had seen in years. The judge returned to the bench, calm and composed, but with a different air, one that said he knew the gravity of what was happening. The jury filtered back in, stealing glances at the little girl who had shattered the silence with just 2 words. Lily sat on a padded chair beside her mother near the front. Max lay beside her, head resting on his paws, tail occasionally thumping softly against the floor. His quiet companionship filled the room with a comfort no human presence could match. He didn't bark, didn't whine. He simply existed as a steady presence, grounding Lily as if his very heartbeat steadied hers. The prosecutor rose first. He stepped toward the center of the courtroom and addressed the judge with careful confidence. Your Honor, based on this morning's events and the statements given during recess, all of which were voluntarily made and consistent with the child's previously documented trauma, the prosecution formally requests to introduce the recording of the child's spontaneous utterance and related statements made in the comfort room with court-appointed psychologist Dr. Rhodes. The defense shot up immediately. Objection, Your Honor. The child is not a sworn witness. She has not been subjected to cross-examination, and any recording of her conversation could prejudice the jury unfairly. The judge raised a hand calmly. I understand the objection, but given the child's mental health record, the sudden vocalization after extended silence, the presence of a court-licensed therapist, and the lack of prosecutorial prompting, I am prepared to rule this as a spontaneous declaration under the excited utterance exception. The jury will hear it, and I will instruct them on how to weigh its credibility accordingly. The defense sat down slowly. They knew this was bad, worse than they'd expected. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the audio playback was set up. The recording played, and Lily's small voice filled the room. He yelled, "Make Mommy cry," door slammed. He pulled my arm. I screamed, but Mommy didn't come. She was on the floor. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Even the jurors, told to remain stoic, showed clear emotion. One older man wiped his eyes. A woman near the back turned away briefly, her hand to her mouth. And then came the moment that truly shook the room. In the recording, the psychologist asked, "Did anyone help you?" And Lily replied, "A big dog. He came in my dream. He scared the bad man away. He made me safe. Was it Max? Yes, he's real now." When the playback ended, the courtroom was silent again, not because it was expected, but because no one knew how to follow that. A child, with no prompting, had connected her trauma, her memory, and her healing all to one moment. One animal. One presence. Her truth had risen from a place so deeply buried that no one thought it could be reached. A defense attorney tried to regroup. He whispered to Thomas Keene, but the man was pale, sweating, shifting in his seat like he was sitting on broken glass. Gone was the smug expression. Gone was the control. Something inside him had cracked, and now it was showing. The prosecutor stood again. The people would like to call Officer Green and K9 Max to the stand. The judge nodded. Proceed. Officer. Green took the oath and approached the stand, Max obediently following him and sitting by his side. Green looked around the courtroom, then down at Max with a small smile. Please state your role. Officer, the prosecutor began. I'm Officer James Green, K9 handler for Max, assigned to trauma and victim support detail. Has Max ever interacted with a child who responded like this? Green shook his head. Not like this. She found her voice through him. She found her courage. The courtroom was still. No coughing, no rustling of papers, just the powerful silence of truth that had finally found a way through. Officer Green remained on the witness stand, his calm presence mirroring Max's steady demeanor. The prosecutor paced slowly in front of the jury box. allowing each juror a moment to absorb what they had heard from the recording and what they now saw firsthand. He turned back toward the witness. Officer Green, in your professional opinion, what did you observe in the child's behavior that led you to believe Max made a difference? Green leaned forward. Sir, I've seen a lot of kids, some scared, some scarred, but this little girl, she was locked inside herself, wouldn't look at anyone, wouldn't speak. The second she touched Max, it was like someone turned the key. She looked him right in the eye and walked toward her fear. And did she say anything to you personally? Green nodded. She didn't speak to me directly. But when she touched Max, she looked at the defendant and said, "Bad man," twice. No hesitation. Just ... truth. The prosecutor thanked him and returned to his table. As Green stepped down, Max followed, drawing hushed admiration from many in the gallery. The judge allowed Max to remain beside Lily's chair, a quiet sign of respect for the dog's role. In the unfolding truth, the defense team regrouped quickly, desperate to regain control of the narrative. They attempted to discredit Lily's account, claiming her statements could have been shaped by adult suggestion or influenced by emotional attachments to the dog. But their arguments felt cold and disconnected now, especially compared to the raw, unscripted emotions of a child who had simply spoken from her heart. To challenge that felt like arguing with gravity. The defense attorney requested a private sidebar with the judge, hoping to file a motion to suppress Lily's recorded statement entirely. But the judge denied it flatly. The child's statement qualifies under spontaneous declaration. The judge said firmly, "The court finds her testimony and her interaction with the K-9 unit credible and admissible. The jury will decide how to weigh it." When court reconvened, the judge addressed the room with something rarely heard in such chambers: vulnerability. "I've presided over many difficult cases," he began, "but I want the record to reflect that in all my years, I've never seen a child show such courage, or a dog show such restraint and purpose. Let the people watching understand, justice comes in many forms." Back at the prosecution's table, Rachel reached over to take Lily's hand. The little girl looked up and smiled gently, her eyes brighter than they had been in months. Max sat beside her, close enough for her to lean on, and when she did, he didn't move, didn't even blink. The jury watched all of it. Later that afternoon, Dr. Melina Rhodes, the child psychologist, was called to the stand. She explained trauma-induced silence, how fear can choke a child's ability to speak, and how a safe trigger, like a dog, could reopen those emotional channels. She didn't repeat what someone told her, Dr. Rhodes said. She relived what she survived, and that dog helped her find a voice she'd buried out of fear. With each passing hour, Thomas Keene looked smaller, more withdrawn. His arrogance had evaporated. He stopped looking toward the jury and began avoiding their eyes entirely. For the first time since his arrest, it looked like he understood he might actually be held accountable. As the sun began to dip below the courthouse windows, the judge adjourned for the day. The bailiff called for order, and the gallery slowly emptied, but no one talked loudly. There were no casual conversations. People walked out in silence, lost in thought, like they had witnessed something bigger than justice. Something personal, almost sacred. Rachel carried Lily out into the hallway. A reporter tried to speak with her, but the prosecutor quickly stepped in, shielding them from questions. Lily didn't notice. She was humming softly now, holding Max's leash like it was a lifeline. The nightmare wasn't over yet, but something had shifted, something real. The courtroom had been shaken, and everyone knew the case would never be the same again. The next morning, Courtroom 3B was packed well before the proceedings resumed. News of Lily's 2 words and the audio recording had spread fast. And now the gallery overflowed with observers, law students, and even local advocates for child protection. But despite the buzz, the atmosphere remained reverent. Everyone could feel it. They weren't just watching a trial. They were witnessing a little girl fight a silent war against her past. And somehow, she was winning. Lily arrived early with her mother and Officer Green, walking beside Max with a tiny but firm grip on the leash. Her head was high. She wasn't being dragged or clutched anymore. She was walking in by choice. Rachel stayed close but didn't hover, letting her daughter claim her space. Dr. Rhodes followed, ready to take the stand again if necessary. The judge entered shortly after, and noticing Lily's presence, gave a small respectful nod. The courtroom stood, sat, and waited. The prosecutor rose with a focused calm and made his next move. Your Honor, the people would like to call forensic analyst Dana Morales to the stand. A woman in her 40s, sharp-eyed and confident, took her place. She had been part of the early investigation, but her findings had been largely dismissed as inconclusive until now. Ms. Morales, the prosecutor began, can you explain the relevance of the blood spatter evidence found on the kitchen floor of the defendant's home? Yes, she said. Initially, we couldn't draw direct conclusions. But the child's recorded statements from yesterday created a timeline and specific memory reference. She said, he pulled my arm. Mommy was on the floor. With that context, we reviewed the angles again and realized the droplets matched a vertical impact, consistent with someone being shoved violently to the ground. And the child's mother? She had head trauma and bruising consistent with a fall. We now believe the blood was hers. The jury scribbled notes furiously. Next, the prosecutor brought in Officer Ramirez, one of the officers who responded that night. Did you encounter the child during your arrival? The prosecutor asked. Yes, she was under the dining room table, shaking and silent. She wouldn't make eye contact. Did the accused offer an explanation? He said she must have tripped. But when I asked why the mother was bleeding, he claimed she fell and hit the cabinet. His story didn't hold up, but without the girl speaking, we couldn't counter it. Now, with Lily's testimony, the pattern was undeniable. Everything she said matched the evidence, piece by piece. What once seemed like accidental trauma now looked like deliberate abuse. The defense tried to discredit the sudden reliability of a child's memory, but their objections felt thin, almost desperate. Jurors no longer leaned back with folded arms. They leaned forward, engaged, present. Rachel was asked to testify next. She described how Thomas had become increasingly volatile before she left him, how he masked it around others, but unleashed it behind closed doors. He never hit Lily in front of me. Until that night, she whispered. When I tried to stop him, he threw me to the ground. I must have blacked out. I woke up hours later. She was huddled against the wall, silent. She hasn't spoken about it until yesterday. Her voice cracked. I thought I failed her forever. But she found her own way. That afternoon, the court recessed again. As people stood to leave, Max nudged Lily's hand gently with his nose, sensing her tension. She giggled, then said, clear as day, good boy. It was the first time she had laughed in court. The sound made Rachel cry all over again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from hope. Got back in the hallway. Reporters waited, but none approached. There was an invisible line drawn now, a recognition that this wasn't just news. It was personal, sacred. The truth had emerged, not through pressure or argument, but through trust, safety, and a dog's quiet loyalty. The prosecutor knew the final blow was near, and the little girl, who once couldn't speak, was now the loudest voice in the room. As the final day of testimony began, a thick hush blanketed courtroom 3B. No reporters whispered, no phones buzzed. Even the sound of chairs scraping against the floor seemed quieter than usual. The tension wasn't about doubt anymore. It was about anticipation. Everyone could feel justice approaching, slow and steady, like the footsteps of something heavy but righteous. Lily entered quietly with Max and Rachel, just as she had the past few days, walking with calm determination. She no longer looked afraid of the courtroom. She had begun to own her space, even if she didn't fully understand the legal significance of what was happening around her. All she knew was this: the man who had made her cry was finally being made to listen. Thomas Keene looked like a shell of the man who had once strolled into the courtroom confident, smug, unshaken. Now his eyes darted nervously toward the jury box. His suit, once neatly pressed, now wrinkled. He tugged at his collar like it was too tight, even in the chilled courtroom air. The prosecutor stood and delivered his closing argument. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady and low. "When this trial began, we told you we would prove what happened in that house, even without the victim's words. And for a while, it looked like we couldn't. But then, in the middle of this very courtroom, a child, a silent, frightened child, walked to the one soul she trusted, a K-9 officer named Max, and found her voice." He paused, locking eyes. With each juror, she didn't rehearse those words. No adult prompted her. No psychologist fed her lines. She saw the man who hurt her mother. She remembered what he did. And she called him what he was: a bad man. The gallery remained still, hanging on every word. She didn't give us legal testimony. She gave us the truth. That truth led us to revisit the evidence. And what we found, blood, bruises, behavioral trauma, all pointed to one thing. Not an accident. Not misunderstanding. Abuse. And now, you have the power to give that truth the weight it deserves. He sat down slowly, leaving a profound silence behind him. The defense attorney stood next. His tone was more subdued than in earlier days. "Ladies and gentlemen, I do not deny the child has been through something traumatic, but memory in young children is unreliable. What she believes now may not be what happened. We cannot allow emotion to override reason. You must decide based on law, not sympathy." But his words rang hollow. No one could forget the look in Lily's eyes when she pointed at Thomas. No one could ignore the calm clarity in her voice when she uttered those two devastating words. The judge delivered final instructions to the jury, and they were dismissed for deliberation. Hours passed. People in the gallery waited quietly, some holding coffee cups with trembling hands. Rachel sat on a bench outside, Lily asleep on her lap, Max curled at their feet like a silent guardian. The prosecutor paced a little, but said nothing. At last, the buzzer rang. The courtroom quickly filled. The jury filed in. The forewoman stood, holding the verdict slip. "In the case of the state versus Thomas Keene," she read aloud, her voice clear, "on the count of aggravated child endangerment, we find the defendant guilty." Rachel burst into tears. "On the count of assault resulting in serious injury, guilty." A soft gasp filled the room. "And on the count of domestic violence with a minor present, guilty." Thomas slumped in his chair, his lawyer dropping, his head into his hands. The judge thanked the jury and ordered the bailiff to take the defendant into custody immediately. Shackles clicked into place. For the first time in months, Rachel exhaled fully, deeply, as if she'd been holding her breath the entire time. She looked down at Lily, still asleep, and then at Max, who blinked up at her like he already knew. Justice had risen, and the little girl had helped lift it with the quiet power of her truth. The next morning, the courtroom sat empty, not from lack of interest, but because the verdict had already been delivered, and the weight of it still hung in the air like sacred dust. Yet something lingered beyond the legal resolution. It wasn't just about justice for a crime. It was about something deeper, the resilience of a child, the loyalty of a dog, and the quiet power of truth spoken without force. Outside, the courthouse lawn had turned into a sea of murmuring voices and clicking cameras. News crews had swarmed. And overnight, eager to tell the story of the little girl who broke her silence with 2 words and helped convict her abuser. But Rachel didn't come out to give interviews. She had no interest in public praise or headlines. She only wanted to take her daughter home, somewhere safe, where silence didn't feel like fear anymore. Lily stood beside her mother, gripping her hand tightly, while Max sat calmly at her side, as though he'd been assigned to her permanently. And in a way, he had. Though he belonged to the department, the judge had quietly filed a special request, one supported by officers and psychologists alike, that Max be allowed to retire early and live with Lily full-time as her emotional support companion. It wasn't protocol, but everyone agreed. It was right. Before leaving the courthouse, Rachel and Lily made one last quiet visit inside, walking slowly through the now empty courtroom. The wooden benches, the judge's bench, the jury box, all were still. But to Lily, it wasn't scary anymore. She pointed to the front where Max had once laid by the witness stand. Max sat there. She whispered. Rachel nodded, tears returning. He did, and you are so brave. Lily turned and looked up at her. I was scared. I know, her mother said, kneeling beside her. But you told the truth. And that's the bravest thing anyone can do. Lily gave a tiny nod, then hugged her mother tightly. Over her shoulder, Max stood, walked up to the pair, and gently nudged his head between them. Both of them laughed softly, the first real unburdened laugh they'd shared in a long, long time. That same day, the judge released a written statement to the public. In all my years on the bench, I have never witnessed such raw courage as that displayed by a 3-year-old child and a K-9 officer. Justice was not only served, it was led to light by innocence, truth, and trust. Let this case be remembered not only for its outcome, but for the reminder that sometimes the smallest voice carries the loudest truth. The story went national. Across the country, schools, child advocacy groups, and therapy programs shared the courtroom video, highlighting the importance of trauma-informed care and the unique bond between children and trained animals. Other courthouses began looking into K-9 comfort programs. For once, the media wasn't chasing scandal. They were sharing hope. As the weeks passed, Lily began to speak more freely at home. Her nightmares lessened. The crying fits stopped. She even began to draw again, often sketching a big dog with a shiny badge and a happy tail. One evening, Rachel tucked Lily into bed. As she pulled up the blanket, Lily asked, "Mommy, is Max still my hero?" Rachel smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. He always will be." Max, lying near the doorway, lifted his head at the sound of his name and thumped his tail once against the hardwood floor. He didn't need applause. He didn't need a medal. He had Lily's trust, and that was more than enough. In the end, justice hadn't been won by a courtroom alone, nor by the evidence, nor by the loudest voices. It had been won by a child's whisper, a dog's presence, and 2 small, unforgettable words. Bad man,